Welcome, viewers. This is the third talk on how LPG and the way it was undermined and the betrayal of it all by the public servant government institutions is a warning that the wind and solar schemes are repeating the same pattern. They're not going to last. Australians were told LPG was the future. Government backed it with grants, households acted in good faith, and a national user base was built. Then incentives were reversed. The economics weakened, stations disappeared that supplied it, and ordinary Australians were the loss and wore the loss. Now the country is being pushed into another large energy transition at massive expense. And the central question is no longer whether change is happening, but whether Australians, us Australians, are again being asked to carry long-term risk without long-term guarantees. The presentation argues that LPG was not just a fuel, it was a model of transition betrayal. Government encouragement first, household investment second, policy reversal third, infrastructure contraction fourth, and consumer loss at the end. And the warning is that wind and solar policy can repeat and are repeating the same pattern of cost, reliability, transmission, storage and consumer protection are not confronted honestly before the transition is locked in. But that's all too late. They've pushed it blindly against the advice of many people that could see through it. Chris Bowen, the public servant, has lost his mind over it. It reminds me of these people that get up in these churches and put on these fancy-filled messages about how God wants you to give. And the church will take all the money and invest it in real estate, and there's people sitting in the congregation starving or broke or just like they don't even exist. This is the same thing. And LPG and the betrayal of it by the public servant government institutional leaders was the warning. And they are going to repeat the same mistake with wind and solar. Teaching point number 1. Government, public servant institutional government, deliberately created LPG dependence. They created dependence on LPG. And the Commonwealth did not merely allow LPG adoption, it actively promoted it through the LPG vehicle scheme, established in 2006 to increase uptake of LPG vehicles and conversions. ANAO stated the scheme was expected to support more than 535,000 grants at an estimated total cost of $870 million. That's just shy of $1 billion. By June 2009, 226,619 grants had already been paid, costing $500 million. The LPG vehicle scheme began in 2006, projecting 535,000 plus project grants at a cost of just under $1 billion. 226,619 grants paid by June 2009 at the cost of $500 million being spent at that time to get it where it was. Are you learning anything? Teaching point number 2. Australia's acted in good faith because the public servant government institutions told them to. LPG was presented as a practical, affordable transition. During its peak, Australia had about 500,000 LPG vehicles on the road, helped by grants, cheap fuel economics, and I can remember when you could get LPG for 19 cents a litre and factory LGP options from Ford and Holden. And this matters because it proves the public response was not irrational. People followed the policy signal, the signal that the public servant institutions and the government sent them. The peak national LPG fleet of roughly 500,000 vehicles, consumers converted their cars or bought LPG vehicles, and governments backed confidence helped drive the adoption. Teaching point number 3. Then the public servants, the government institutions, changed the rules. The decline was not only market driven, the policy environment changed. The ANAO scheme was finite, grants immediately stopped, and LPG's economic advantage was eroded almost in an instant. Once the pipeline of incentives and new LPG vehicles dried up, the public was left exposed to a shrinking system they had been encouraged to join. And that is the betrayal structure. That's how the public servant government institution works. It works on a betrayal structure where people profit at the expense of the everyday Australians, the taxpayers. They encourage entry, then withdraw support after households have already committed. The incentives ended, long-term consumer protection did not follow, and the household investment outlasted policy commitment. Basically, the public servant government institution abandoned the people that it was supposed to support, and they still do this in every aspect and respect today. Teaching point number 4, viewers. The infrastructure collapsed nationwide. Now, this was not a small or local issue. In Western Australia alone, the number of service stations selling LPG dropped from 329 to 50 over roughly a decade, according to WA Consumer Protection. And that is an 84.8% collapse. The significance is not merely regional, it illustrates what happens when a once supported fuel is no longer defended structurally. So the WA LPG stations went from 330 basically to 50, an 84.8% collapse. Shrinking infrastructure drives shrinking usability. And again, the Australian believers in what the public servant government institutions had set up were left stranded. Teaching point number 5. LPG exposed a broader public servant government institution pattern. This is a pattern. The real scandal is not simply that LPG declined, because the LPG has always been there. It is that the government, these public servant government institutions, can induce major economic behaviours and leave their citizens holding the risk when long-term settings change. And this will repeat. And that makes LPG a warning, not an isolated event. It shows the Australian people, the public, the taxpayer, it shows the public can be induced into a transition before durability, affordability, and infrastructure continuity are truly secured. And they're doing it again with solar and wind. Number one, government creates dependence, then consumers commit capital, then policy settings shift, then infrastructure contracts, and then citizens inherit the downside. Teaching point number 6. The current wind and solar push has very large system costs that have been hidden when they were pushing all this through. Any serious critic now has to confront scale. The AEMO's draft 2026 ISP says around 6,000 kilometres of new transmission will be needed by 2050 under the main pathway. The broader optimal development path is described as the least cost mix to retire and replace retiring coal while meeting demand growth. Reporting on the same draft, ISP states the pathway carries an estimated present value of about $128 billion through to 2050. You can blow that out to $500 billion by the time they do it. And around 600,000 kilometres of new transmission. Actually 6,000 kilometres of new transmission. Approximately 128 billion pathway costs through to 2025. You can make that 500 billion. And cost replacement requires grid scale generation, storage and network build out. So there's going to be a lot of people profit. It's going to make LPG look like a Sunday picnic. Teaching point number 7. Electricity prices have risen materially during the transition era, and they will continue to rise. The AEMC's Residential Electricity Price Trends 2025 material shows residential electricity prices rose faster than CPI over the 3 years to September 2025. And that matters because the public was repeatedly sold the transition as a cost relief pathway, yet actual lived experience has included significant price pressure. This does not prove renewables alone caused every increase, but it does prove that transition equals immediate household relief. And it's not an honest summary of what households have experienced, which is the opposite. Residential electricity prices up to 19% over 3 years to September 2025. That's how much it's risen. And the CPI up 12% over the same period. Teaching point number 8. Generation cost claims are real, but incomplete. To stay credible, the presentation has to acknowledge CSIRO gen costs. CSIRO says electricity consistent with the 2030 82% renewables target is projected at about $81 MWH for wholesale generation and $91 MWH including transmission. That means the cleanest argument is not that renewables are free or worthless, but that the generation cost headlines do not equal the total cost households bear. So the CSIRO itself notes retail bills also include transmission, distribution, retail margins, and policy costs. So retail bills include much more than generation of the electricity alone. Teaching point number 9. The repeat risk is the same structure as LPG. This is where the presentation lands the hardest. Australian taxpayers are again being told to trust a large transition. Everybody around them seems to be profiting. And again, there are subsidies, infrastructure promises, policy certainty language, and moral pressure to move quickly. Again, there are unresolved questions about long-term affordability, backup systems, replacement cycles, grid resilience, and who ultimately absorbs the overruns, which will be the taxpayers. LPG showed the government incentives are not the same thing as long-term protection, and that is the bridge. Incentives do not equal performance, promotion does not equal protection, and transition slogans do not equal system stability. Teaching point number 10, viewers. The real demand is accountability of these public servant government institutions before commitment. The strongest public argument is not oppose all transition. It is prove the system before demanding the sacrifice. Before Australians are pushed further into solar, wind, battery and electrification dependence, governments should be required to show durable affordability, reliable backup, credible transmission delivery, life cycle cost honesty, and a real consumer protection plan if assumptions fail. And that is the lesson LPG should have already taught the country. Prove affordability, prove reliability, prove infrastructure delivery, prove consumer protection, and do not socialise risk onto households again. So let's reflect. What happens to a nation, in this case Australia, when public servant government institutions repeatedly ask ordinary taxpayers to trust major transitions unproven, but ordinary people are the ones left carrying the losses when those transitions fail or change course? That's abandonment, viewers. Challenge. Do not let this transition taking place under Bowen be sold on slogans. Demand full life cycle accountability before households are pushed into another economic system they do not control. Proverb. A government that persuades people to commit before it proves long-term stability teaches the public to fear the next promise. And if you don't fear what's going on with batteries and wind turbines and solar, you would have to have a close look at how you see and think. LPG should have permanently changed the way Australians, the taxpayers, hear the public servant government institution transition language. The state encouraged adoption, households invested, support weakened, the infrastructure collapsed, and the public taxpayers of Australia inherited the cost. Wind, solar, batteries, you name it, these policies may or may not end the same way in every aspect and respect, but the repeat risk is already visible. Large promises, major capital outlays, and many are profiting from it tremendously. Rising system complexity and citizens being asked to trust before permanence is proven. So, the issue is not whether energy systems change. The issue is whether Australian taxpayers will again be told to commit first and discover the fine print later. And that is what the LPG betrayal is warning us about. I'm Dr. JWA, Count Straight on this channel, Pro Theologist, also on YouTube, Pro Bricky and Pro Theologist on Facebook. Share, subscribe, like, and I will see you on the next one.